I used to tell people that finding my roommate Derek was the best stroke of luck I'd had since moving to the city. Rent was brutal. My old apartment fell through 2 weeks before the lease started, and a mutual friend from college mentioned this guy who needed someone to split a 2-bedroom near the transit line. We met for coffee first, the way you're supposed to, and he seemed normal. A little quiet, maybe, but normal. He worked nights doing something with logistics, IT stuff, he said, servers and shipping software. And he liked to keep to himself during the day. That sounded perfect to me. I worked a regular 9 to 5 at an insurance office, and the idea of having the apartment to myself most evenings while he slept, then having him gone most nights while I slept, felt less like living with a stranger and more like living alone with backup rent money. The first month was easy. We'd cross paths in the kitchen sometimes, exchange a few words about the dishes or the Wi-Fi bill, and that was about the extent of it. He kept his door closed most of the time. I remember thinking it was almost too good, like I'd won some kind of roommate lottery. The quiet type who doesn't throw parties or eat your leftovers. It was the second month when I started noticing the small things. Nothing dramatic, just little inconsistencies that didn't quite add up. I'd come home and find the thermostat set to 62 degrees, even though I distinctly remembered leaving it at 70 that morning. I mentioned it once, joking that he must run hot, and he just shrugged and said he liked it cold when he slept. Fair enough. Then I started noticing that some of my things had been moved. Not stolen, just moved. A phone charger that I always kept plugged in by my bed would be coiled up on the dresser instead. A book I'd left open on the coffee table, face down to keep my place, would be closed and stacked with the others. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I probably moved these things myself and forgot, because who does that? Who goes into their roommate's room and rearranges tiny objects for no reason? But it kept happening, and it was always small enough that I couldn't be sure, which I realize now might have been the point. About 6 weeks in, I woke up around 3 in the morning because I heard footsteps in the hallway. That wasn't unusual by itself. Derek worked nights, so I figured he was leaving for his shift or coming home early. I rolled over and tried to fall back asleep, but something about the pacing of the footsteps bothered me. They were slow, deliberate, not the rushed shuffle of someone late for work or the tired shuffle of someone finally getting to bed. They stopped right outside my door. I lay there in the dark, listening, telling myself he probably just needed something from the bathroom and the hallway happened to pause near my room, because that's just where the hallway was. But the pause went on. 10 seconds, 20. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then, finally, the footsteps continued, and I heard his door close down the hall. In the morning, I almost said something. I even rehearsed it in my head while brushing my teeth. Something casual like, "Hey man, did you need something last night? You were standing outside my door for a while." But when I saw him in the kitchen, pouring cereal like it was any other day, completely unbothered, I lost my nerve. It felt stupid to accuse someone of just standing in a hallway. Hallways are for standing in. That's what I told myself. Weeks passed and the incidents kept happening, spaced out just enough that I could never build a solid case in my own head, could never point to a pattern and say, "There, that's proof of something wrong." A missing kitchen knife that turned up in the dish rack 3 days later, in a spot I'd already checked twice. My laptop, which I always closed before bed, open a few inches the next morning, screen dark, but definitely open. I started sleeping with my door locked, which felt ridiculous. locking a door in an apartment I was paying half the rent for, but I did it anyway. And I told myself it was just for peace of mind. Then came the night. I actually saw him do it. I'd gotten up around 2 in the morning for water, moving quietly because it was a weeknight, and I assumed he was either at work or asleep. As I came down the hallway, I noticed his door was open, just a crack, and the room behind it was dark except for the pale blue glow of what I assumed was his laptop screen. I wasn't trying to look. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't spying. I just glanced because the door was open and the light caught my eye. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, perfectly still, staring at his laptop screen. And on that screen was a live video feed. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at, because the angle was strange, low and slightly tilted. And then I recognized the edge of my own bookshelf in the frame. It was my room. He had a camera in my room. I don't remember deciding to move. I just remember being back in my own room with the door locked and my back against it. My heart slamming so hard I could feel it in my throat. I sat there for what felt like hours, running through every possible innocent explanation. Because that's what your mind does when the alternative is too frightening to accept right away. Maybe it was an old feed from before I moved in. Maybe it was a smart home app showing something else entirely and I'd misread the angle in the half second I looked. Maybe. I didn't sleep that night. Around 6 in the morning, I heard him leave for his shift, and I got up, moved like I was underwater, and searched my room. It took almost 20 minutes before I found it. A small black lens, no bigger than a shirt button, tucked into the seam of the smoke detector on my ceiling, angled down toward my bed. I sat on the floor holding that thing in my hand, and I felt something shift in my chest, a kind of cold clarity that replaced the fear for just a moment. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't me imagining things. Someone had been watching me sleep for who knows how long, and that someone lived 20 feet down the hall and ate cereal across from me like nothing was wrong. I wanted to call the police immediately, but something held me back, some instinct telling me to think this through before I made a move. Because if he came home and found the camera missing and me acting strange, I didn't know what he'd do. So I put the camera back exactly where I found it, angled the same way, and I spent the day at work pretending everything was normal while actually doing everything I could to figure out my next step. I called a friend who worked in IT and asked, hypothetically, how someone could check what a hidden camera was connected to, whether it was recording locally or streaming somewhere. He walked me through it over the phone, and that night, while Derek was at work, I found the small hard drive taped underneath his dresser, hidden behind a loose panel that looked like part of the furniture unless you were looking for it. I didn't touch it. I just took pictures on my phone, my hands shaking so badly that half of them came out blurry. And then I put everything back exactly the way it had been. The next few days were the hardest of my life, because I had to keep acting normal around someone I now knew was capable of something deeply wrong. Someone who had been watching me in my most private moments and doing it with a kind of careful, patient precision that made my skin crawl every time I thought about it. I started noticing things about him I'd never paid attention to before. The way his eyes lingered a half second too long when he looked at me. The way he always seemed to know small details about my day that I never remembered telling him. Once he mentioned offhand that I must have had a rough morning, since I looked tired. And I realized with a sick lurch that I hadn't told him I'd slept badly. He'd have no way of knowing that unless he'd seen me. I contacted the police, quietly, on a lunch break. from a bathroom stall at work, because I didn't trust the apartment anymore. Didn't trust that he couldn't hear me even when he wasn't home. They told me what I already suspected, that this was serious, that I needed to gather what evidence I could without tipping him off, and that I should stay somewhere else if possible while they built a case. I told them I couldn't just leave, that leaving would look suspicious. And looking back, I think some part of me also just refused to believe things could get worse than a hidden camera. I was wrong about that. 3 nights later, I woke up to a sound that didn't belong in an empty apartment. A soft scrape, metal against wood, coming from somewhere close. I lay still, straining to hear over my own pulse, and then I heard it again, closer this time, right outside my door. I remembered I'd locked it. I remembered that clearly. But I also remembered that he'd lived there longer than me, that he probably had a spare key to every door in the place, that landlords keep those things and roommates find them. The doorknob turned, slowly. I watched it rotate in the dim moonlight coming through my window. And I have never, in my life, felt fear like that. A fear that empties you out and leaves nothing but animal instinct behind. The door didn't open, because I'd wedged a chair under the handle 2 nights earlier. A habit I'd started without even fully admitting to myself why. The knob strained against it, then released. Footsteps retreated down the hallway. I called the police again that night, this time not caring how it looked, and I stayed on the phone with the dispatcher until I heard sirens outside. When they arrived and knocked, there was no answer from his room. They found him gone, the window in his bedroom open, screen popped out and left on the fire escape. He'd heard the sirens, or maybe he'd heard me on the phone through the wall, through some device I never found, and he'd run. They searched his room and found more than I expected. More cameras, notebooks with dates and times. Entries about me that read less like a diary and more like a hunting log, meticulous, clinical, describing my routines with a kind of ownership that made the detective reading it out loud pause more than once. There was a knife missing from a set they found in his closet. The same knife, I realized later, that had disappeared from our kitchen months earlier and reappeared in the dish rack. He'd taken it out at some point, for reasons I try very hard not to imagine, and then put it back before I noticed anything more than a passing oddity. They never found him that night. It took 11 days before he was picked up 2 states away, driving a car that wasn't registered to him, using a name that wasn't his. I moved out within the week, staying with my sister until I found a new place. Somewhere with a doorman and cameras that belonged to the building instead of a person I trusted. I still check smoke detectors in every room I sleep in now. Out of habit more than anything, running my fingers along the seams before I let myself relax enough to close my eyes. Most of the time there's nothing there. Most of the time I think about the version of that story where I never noticed the thermostat. Never happened to glance through a cracked door at exactly the wrong moment. Never felt that instinct to lock my own bedroom door in an apartment I was paying to live in. I think about how close I came to explaining away every single warning sign, one at a time, until there weren't any warning signs left to explain, only whatever he'd been building toward all along. I don't know what that would have looked like. I've stopped letting myself imagine it in detail, because some nights I can still hear that doorknob turning, slow and patient, in the dark.